Hey, this is Shawn Thomas, and welcome to the Worship Together podcast, featured exclusively here on our Worship Together social media feed. This program is part of our ongoing outreach to create an online community of faith where believers can support one another and share their life experiences and testimonies, and most importantly, worship together. Each podcast episode is part of a 3-part series, and each series will focus on a variety of topics, and sometimes we'll even feature a guest host. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this Worship Together podcast episode. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of our series on the power of not. This is coming from a book that I released back in 2015. It happens to be out of print, but you are able to still find it in digital format on Amazon if you want to check it out. Last week, we covered Not One of the Many. Today's chapter is called Not a Victim. And again, just to review, or if you missed the podcast from last week, the whole concept of the power of not is flipping what's called positive affirmations around. Sometimes it's hard for us to accept statements, I am statements about ourselves that are good, because we have this part of ourselves that may feel like we never live up to be worthy enough. And so it's hard to say I am a good person or I am worthy, but it is easier to at least be able to identify things that we are not, and to say I am not a bad person. I am not unworthy. At least for me, that was easier to do first, and then to grow into a better awareness of who God had created me to be. So that's kind of what these chapters are about. And again, last week we covered Not One of the Many. So we'll begin today by reading from the chapter called Not a Victim. When I was a kid, my parents were strict about not allowing us to watch too much TV. At that time, way before internet and mobile devices and Xbox, television was the evil addiction that every parent feared would rot out their child's brain, not to mention cause blindness and other health problems if you were exposed to it too much. However, my mom had 2 big exceptions. They were Little House on the Prairie and The Waltons. Now, if you were too young to remember these shows, bless your heart. Basically, all you need to know is that they were semi-based on real-life families who lived at 2 different times in our country's history when things were pretty basic in comparison to our modern age. Fathers were head of household, families went to church and had dinner together every night, and kids learned the 3 R's in addition to helping out with household chores. On Little House on the Prairie, people drove horse-drawn carriages, and on the Waltons, they had to crank their car with a handle to make it start. The underlying theme pretty much in every show was how these families and their children lived their lives as best they could in order to be the best people they could be. Emphasis was placed on faith, family, hard work, and doing the right thing. The characters and families each had a strong sense of pride and self-worth. They fended for themselves and in fact were expected to do so by society at large. If someone needed help, the community pitched in wholeheartedly, but as a rule, people were responsible for taking care of themselves. Personal struggles were just that, personal. Accepting handouts was looked down upon, and giving up was never an option. Now jump forward quite a few decades, and oh, how times have changed. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not at all longing for a return to the past or suggesting that we've not made huge leaps forward in society, technology, and quality of life. What does stand out for me, though, is the societal shift and message from personal responsibility to one of entitlement due to victimization. Gone are the days of personal struggles and meeting life's challenges. These are the days of personal exposure, grabs for attention, and expectant adulation and support. The go-to message to deliver to children used to be, you can be anything you want to be. Now, schools, churches, kids clubs, and even youth sports are sending 2 new, very different messages. Number 1, don't be better than anyone else or you might hurt their feelings. And number 2, if someone is better than you at something, well, that's not fair and they owe you. On the one hand, knowing that you can be anything you want to be assumes 2 very important conditions. Number 1, you are not yet all that you can be. And number 2, it's going to take some effort. On the other hand, believing that excellence should be followed with an apology and that failure should receive reparation assumes 2 completely different conditions. Number 1, you are entitled to be all that anyone else can be. And number 2, anyone who doesn't recognize your entitlement is victimizing you. Suddenly in America, it's cool and even encouraged to be the victim. But it's really just a child's game of trying to get attention. It's very similar to the reason that you've learned not to ask certain people in your life the question, "How are you?" Because you know they're just waiting for the opportunity to lay out every problem or illness in their life, along with a few made-up ones probably. This is the "mommy, look at me" syndrome, except instead now we say, "Look how horrible I've had it," or "Look how taken advantage of I am," and we're proud of it. We brag about it on Facebook and Twitter, just aching for more likes and comments and reassurances of how important we are and how much everyone loves us. I realize how easy it is at this point to accuse me of insensitivity, or much worse. After all, I just used The Waltons and Little House on the Prairie as examples when both plot lines pretty much ignore the struggle for equality for Black Americans while supporting male-dominant societal roles. I just encouraged teaching kids to be competitive, which apparently leads to bullying, and I've implied that we should ignore some people when they ask for help. I must be heartless. On the contrary, I'm trying to stand up for, quote, the little guy. The thing that frustrates me the most about the new cultural norm to not only accept the role of the victim, but to strive for it, is that it degrades people who actually have had tragedy or real victimization in their lives. When large factions of society are walking around acting as if they've had it so bad, it takes away the legitimacy of the struggles of those who are truly less fortunate. It takes away resources of assistance and outreach. It takes away response time. It takes away opportunities. It's stealing. The other thing about this environment of entitlement and victimization is how it redistributes power. And not in the way a lot of people might think. The problem with accepting the role of victim is that it makes us passive. Once we become victims, we need someone to help us, to take care of us, to make decisions for us. That's the shift in power. It's a transfer. No, it's a surrender of personal power to another person or organization. Whether it's the government or other powers that be in control, corporate belief of victimization is a way of pacifying a large segment of the population by making us believe we can't do this on our own. We can't live on our own. We can't care for ourselves on our own. Therefore, we need someone else to do it for us. We need someone else to take responsibility. We are victims, but more than that, we're passive. Like a puppy rolling over on its back in submission with its legs in the air. Take care of me, I'm so helpless. Eventually, those who have been caring, quote unquote, for the disenfranchised victims split into two groups. Group 1, seeing a continuing decline in the productivity and quality of life those they're trying so hard to help, concludes that these poor souls are even worse off than everyone thought, so more regulation and control must be exerted in order to keep them from hurting themselves even further. In other words, Group 1 wants more redistribution of power to themselves from those who are hurting. Now, Group 2, seeing not only a decline in the quality of life for those receiving assistance, but also from the community at large because of drained resources, concludes all the rules designed to protect victims are actually creating more victims, and it's time for some tough love. This is the point where the entitled really get upset. The identity of "I've been taken advantage of" begins to crumble apart. The rest of society starts to say, no, there's a line here. At some point, you have to take responsibility. You have to take care of yourself. You're not a victim. Oh, and there's our negative affirmation. You're not a victim. Up to this point, we've gone through life with the positive affirmation of, I am a victim. This is who I am. Now we're being asked to release that identity. In my previous book, I included a chapter that was called Separate No More, which talked about the need for humans to feel special. We want to stand out, to be exceptional. But if we can't be exceptionally great, then we strive for being exceptionally special. We identify or we create something about ourselves that makes us special, and therefore we are entitled to whatever it is we believe has been withheld from us. I referred to the story of the man at the pool of Bethesda in John chapter 5, verses 1 through 14 as an example of someone who held so tightly to their victim identity that he even blamed Jesus for getting him in trouble with the legal authorities. After all, if Jesus hadn't healed him from paralysis, he wouldn't have been walking around carrying his mat. In identifying something about ourselves that is quote-unquote special, we justify reparation and entitlement. For example, because I am a minority, I'm entitled to such and such. Because I'm female, I'm entitled to. Because I'm gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered. Because I'm a certain race. Because I'm an only child. Because I have health problems. However, there is no entitlement that is guaranteed to any of us. Earning and deserving something based on our personal efforts, successes, even failures, that's a whole other concept. We are not simply entitled to success. Even the Declaration of Independence only guarantees the right to pursue happiness. We're not guaranteed the achievement of happiness. This is not bad news, folks. In fact, it's a blessing. We have the freedom to take any road in Robert Frost's poem we want to take, that I referred to in the last episode, and pursue that path to the best of our ability. Our choice, our path, our responsibility. I apologize if I seem to be perched on a soapbox here. I don't mean to be unempathetic. What I am is passionate. Unfortunately, these principles of responsibility and self-reliance were not taught to me. I grew up receiving messages of passivity and just getting by. After all, I was part of the MTV generation. I was well into my 30s before I started to consider that there may be more to life than waiting for my ship to come in, and not only wondering why others my age had it so well, but condemning them for their success. What I found is that it's not success that changes people. It's that people change in order to achieve success. And those who knew them before such change of heart and attitude occurs often feel betrayed and left out because they remain in the victim state of mind. The negative affirmation, quote, "I am not a victim," truly changed my life. While there was what you might call a transitional period from one way of looking at the world to another, in another sense, it was an instantaneous shift in my soul. Concepts and principles had to be learned and relearned. But the presence of mind to identify who I am and who I am not was immediate. It was a redistribution of power. It was me taking back what I had surrendered to the world around me and claiming the work God had created in me. And this is why I'm so passionate. This is me on fire for God. This is gratitude and joy and praise to God from whom all blessings flow. This is me acknowledging a power greater than myself and surrendering myself only to that power and never to any worldly condition, person, or experience. This is my amen. I am not a victim. The encouragement that I want to extend to you in order to share my passion is to be all that you are without asking if it's okay with everyone first. Obviously, I don't mean you should employ cruelty or vindictiveness, but you simply allow the power and love of God in you to run free. God created you. We already know from an earlier chapter that you are not just one of many. You are unique. You have been placed in the world with purpose and importance. In Isaiah 60 verse 15, we are told that we are created with an everlasting pride. You don't have to do something right and then God is proud of you. We were created with God's pride. Don't surrender that pride to the world. You are a child of God. If that's too hard for you to believe at this point, then let me start with a negative affirmation. You are not a victim. So folks, that's part 2 of our Power of Not series. Pray on it, think about it, ponder about it this week, and join me next week for part 3, Not Powerless. God bless. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Worship Together podcast. Be sure to check out our show notes in the comments below this post for additional information about today's episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, help us out by spreading the word about our Worship Together feed and invite your friends and church family to join us at worship-together.com.